Now, this is a strange story, but it's scary. It's kind of scary, and it makes us realize how real this stuff actually is. Banks are closing the accounts of Christians. Why? Well, there was this article in Premier Christianity that actually Dr. Rod found and shared with me, that there was a charity, Christian charity in Northern Ireland that had its bank accounts shut. There was also, let me find his name.
That would be the Reverend Fothergill.
Fothergill.
That's
Fothergill,
correct.
that's
Richard
it.
Fothergill. Yep.
Reverend Fothergill. They both had their accounts closed because, not just because they were Christian, right? So don't think that, they're going around just closing random Christians' accounts. No, it wasn't exactly like that, but it was because they actually stood up to the banks. We spoke about before about standing up for what you believe God's called you to stand up for. And both of these people spoke out against the banks for their support and promotion of the LGBT rights or communities or Pride Month or whatever it may have been, something to do with that. And they spoke out their minds, shared what they thought about it, and the banks closed their accounts. Now, there were some, the charity won a £20,000 lawsuit or whatever against them or whatever. But part of me, Dr. Rod, part of me goes, well, what do you expect? If you're gonna speak out against the bank, that that's because they had a pride flag on their email or something like that, it's like, who's that really hurting? I get their point. Like they're saying that, well, a bank should be non-binary, I suppose you could say. A bank should be not emotional and not trying to promote lifestyles, but just focus on the basics of money, So I kind of get that, but well, what do you expect when you go to fight against a bank? They're just going to shut you down. Like, I don't know. What's your thoughts on this situation and the approach?
Look, I really find this quite difficult because I'm a strong believer in freedom, and I kind of sympathise with the banks in a way that they should be able to choose who will and will not be their customers.
Yes.
But I sympathise with the customers as well because we have every right to stick up for what we believe in.
Yes.
And if a bank decides, or any other business for that matter, decides that it's going to campaign on something which is political, and I'm talking here small p political, such as Pride Month, they must expect that not all of their customers are going to agree. And I think the mature thing to do is to accept dissent.
Yep.
I've never been afraid of dissent. As a manager, as a director, as a chair of board, I've never been afraid of dissent. And one reason is that, and this relates, I suppose, to my understanding of the philosophy of science, one of the ways in which human society has made progress is because dissenters have eventually caused us to think about the status quo and in many cases change it.
Yes.
Now, we shouldn't shut down dissenters. So where a Christian charity or an individual dissents from the political line taken by an organisation, I don't think they should be shut down. Now, ideally, there'd be another bank somewhere that championed something other than Pride, and they'd be able to happily trot off and open an account at that bank. That's how a competitive market would behave. But financial markets are very heavily regulated, and it's not so easy to walk down the street to another bank and say, I'll open an account with you. And I think that's where it gets very, very complicated indeed. So I do believe that... Sorry,
Keep
you
going.
go. No,
Keep
that's
going.
okay. You go. Well, no, I do believe that a bank should be free to choose who will be its customers.
Yes.
But the problem arises when customers exercise their freedom to make statements in opposition of a position that a bank has taken. If they are what we call that debanking, what if you end up like Nigel Farage, who gets his accounts closed by his bank, approaches 5 other banks, and they all say, no, thanks, we don't want your accounts.
Yes.
And he reports that 5 of his family members have had the same experience.
Yeah.
Because his political views and his political activity is not necessarily appreciated by everybody. That worries me a lot. That really does worry me a lot. I don't know what the answer is.
Yeah, because like you say that, like, let's talk about the one bank. That bank has every right to say who it doesn't serve. Like, it's not a public service. It's a private organization, and they can choose, just like, and they refer in this article to the bakery that was that refused to do the gay cake and all that sort of stuff. You can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't you can't fight one side and then be upset when someone does the same thing to you, right? Because that was the bakery has every right to refuse who it does business with, and so does the bank. And so I think that they have every right to the charity and everything. They have every right to complain to their bank and say, "Hey, I'm a customer. I'm unhappy with what you're doing because of this." But they also should expect that that if the bank doesn't then want to do business with them, then that's, it's not like they shut them down and they lost their money or anything like that. They just warned them that they were going to close their account. So you've got time to move your money out elsewhere. And so I don't see a problem with that.
But the real problem arises when somebody gets shut out of the market altogether.
Yes, that's
wrong. That shouldn't be happening.
How do you? That's my question to you: is how do we? Because there's nothing wrong with a bank doing that, but when it's 5 banks in a row, it's like, okay, that's a problem. But hold on a second. If it's okay for one bank to do it individually, like how do you then decipher that then the 5th bank? Well, you now no longer have rights to refuse service to someone like everyone else has the right to. You're forced to do it. Let's say it's bakeries, right? There's 5 Christian bakeries and they get refused from every single one of them. And the 5th one, oh, well, now you have to be served.
No, look, I don't think you can do it that way either. And this is a real conundrum. I think because banking is such a basic service, in a modern economy, we really cannot get by without a bank. These days, of course, not every business will accept cash, and in most countries, although the national currency is legal tender, generally speaking, the law doesn't force anybody to accept the currency. They can say, look, we're only going to accept electronic transactions. Yeah. If you've got no relationship with the bank, you won't be able to engage in those transactions. Mm-hmm. And that raises a whole lot of other issues.
Yes.
So in the ideal world, of course, as I say, you'd just be able to walk down the road and go to a bank that doesn't care what you think about Pride Month or may even agree with you. But we don't have that. And it's a conundrum. I think it's very difficult to resolve. And I don't know that governments are well equipped to resolve those sorts of issues, particularly given that they're often driven by ideology in any case. I don't know that there is an easy solution. In my heart of hearts, I think, well, let's go and start a bank. Mm-hmm. But then it may be that because of the views that you have, you won't be able to go through all the regulatory hoops or whatever. I know that I choose to bank with a small bank. There's a takeover offer on the table from a large bank, which is being vetted by our competition regulator. Now, if that goes through, I'm going to withdraw my accounts because I don't like big banks.
Yeah.
and I left big banking 30 years ago, and I don't want to go back that. So I'm looking at taking my accounts to to a small bank, which almost they're not going to be as activist. That by their nature, they tend not to be as activist. So I'll probably have an option here, but it's really difficult for someone like Nigel Farage, who, as a report, the bank wrote to him, said they're giving notice that they'll close his accounts, goes off to 5 other banks. They all say, no, we don't want your business. So what's he going to do? He hasn't really got an option. I think that's pretty tough.
But what is that? But that's what I'm saying. Like, each bank has the right to refuse service to someone. At what point is it no longer someone's right to refuse service? And now,
look, the system isn't working when any customer cannot open an account anywhere. I mean, it's also not working when someone who owns coal mines can't get a bank loan from any bank. On the grounds that, well, you contribute to anthropogenic global warming, so we're not going to lend to you. So thousands of people go without a job. Thousands of poor people in developing countries don't have access to cheap electricity. What tends to happen in our society today is we don't weigh up the benefits and costs.
yes,
We don't count the costs in terms of human flourishing, which I believe we should.
yes,
Human flourishing demands that people have access to banking services, for example. Human flourishing demands that some people have access to cheap power generated by thermal power stations.
yes.
It's
Yeah,
crazy.
God gave us the fossil fuels to use.
Well, we could get into a long discussion about that, and it's an important discussion and one we must have as Christians, because for too long, Christians have really kind of skirted around the whole issue of our relationship to the rest of God's creation, despite what it says in Genesis 1 and 2.
Yeah.
And maybe this is something we should do one of these days.
Let's do that. We will.
People are talking about it now, but it probably wasn't really until the mid-1960s that the Christian world started to wake up to environmental issues.
Yeah.
So we came to them a little bit late. And now, unfortunately, I think in some church circles, we've embraced a kind of theology of environment, which is not that helpful. It's not helpful to human flourishing.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a big and difficult area. There's no doubt about that, and we have to wrestle with it as leaders in the church, as Christian leaders in business. We do have to wrestle with it.
It's difficult. It's difficult because there's no summary to this conversation, because it's a conundrum. It's a juxtaposition. Everyone has the right should have the right to refuse service to whoever they choose to, and we should refuse doing business with whoever we like. That's fine. It's up to us. But there is a point where it is starting to become less and less viable for certain with people with different views. But you know what? I think that's where the doom and gloom is take it too far. So like, all banks are now gonna ban Christian accounts. Okay. So let's look what's happened in media. Facebook, we've spoken about it. Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, all censored way too much, right? And for misinformation, everything like that. So what happened? Rumble started it up. Truth Social started it up. Telegram and Signal, I think it was, started up because WhatsApp was and Facebook were too restrictive and taking too much information, and Elon bought Twitter, and we talk about this like, oh no, what, the world's going to be taken over by this particular thing. Yes, but the great thing about commerce, about capitalism is the blue ocean strategy. If that's all going to be restricted, if all the banks are restricting us, there will be another way. Well, I mean, there's cryptocurrencies now and everything like that I feel like we as Christians shouldn't be too afraid of this sort of stuff. Be aware. We need to be aware of it and make our plans and make adjustments. I mean, when we built our app, yes, link down in the description, shameless plug again. When we built our app, I made sure I built it on a platform that wasn't controlled by one of these big organizations. I built it on a way that I could maneuver it around. I've got it shared out. So if it's deleted off by one of these companies or whatever, I've still got it. And that we wanted to have our own app because we wanted to be in control and not actually be under the control of, there's market opportunities. That's the great thing. That's what we should be excited about. Okay. So banks are closing down Christian accounts. Great. Opportunity for Christians to open up and start a bank or whatever, as Dr. Rod said, right? Like there are more opportunities. So we shouldn't be afraid of this stuff. We should be wary and we should be prepared, but we shouldn't be afraid. Hey, you've just watched an excerpt from the On the Cube Leadership podcast. If you've liked that, give it a thumbs up. If you've got any thoughts of how it challenged or helped your leadership, put a comment below. And we'd be honored if you would consider subscribing for more leadership content. Also, make sure you check out the playlist for more episodes like this.